Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today, we are breaking down some great news the Pittsburgh Steelers got about the Aaron Rodgers situation. We'll be breaking down that great news on today's show. We'll be talking about the latest surrounding the Steelers quarterback search here for their starting quarterback in 2025. And then we'll finish up today's show by talking about some lingering positions of need for the Steelers and how the Steelers can still address those needs before the NFL draft coming up here in a few short weeks. Make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. The NFL draft is just in 40 days, and we're going to have extensive coverage surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers and the NFL draft this year, getting you guys ready for the big day in Green Bay. And of course, whenever the Steelers sign their starting quarterback, whether that's Aaron Rodgers, whether that's Russell Wilson, whether that's somebody else, we will be going live on this channel, whether that's later tonight, whether that's tomorrow, whether that's Monday, whether that's any time after that. We will be going live whenever the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers make a decision. So make sure you click that subscribe button. Okay, so let's talk about some conflicting reports that we are getting on Aaron Rodgers from a bunch of different reputable sources. So today, in fact, earlier this morning, Mike Silver and Dianna Russini, two very reputable reporters out there covering the National Football League, are now saying that Aaron Rodgers is actively wanting to go to the Minnesota Vikings, and they are currently waiting on Kevin O'Connell to make a final decision. Russini even went on Pittsburgh radio, I think it was yesterday, and said that she thinks that he's going to be a Minnesota Viking, and that the Vikings are seriously considering bringing in Aaron Rodgers as their starting quarterback in 2025. Now, there's other reputable sources out there, and the reason why these are conflicting is because guys like Jeremy Fowler and Adam Schefter from ESPN, Tom Pelissero and Ian Rappaport from NFL Network, they seem to not agree with Dianna Russini and Mike Silver in terms of their level of interest in Aaron Rodgers. And Silver and Russini are even saying that Rodgers is seeking a Sam Darnold level contract where he's looking for at least $33 million per season. So, the good news here comes from Benjamin Albright. So if you don't know who Albright is, he is technically a Broncos insider, but he has connections with, around the National Football League, and he has been absolutely stellar in his coverage this offseason. He predicted every single NFL head coaching hire this year for all 7 teams that needed to hire head coach. He predicted all 7. And he has been really plugged in. He was also the person that, if you remember, on another at-home video I did a couple of weeks ago, or actually just before free agency, he was the first one to kind of report that the Steelers were going to be in on Aaron Rodgers. So this is somebody that's very plugged in. He knows what he's talking about, and he addressed the Minnesota Vikings rumors today, and his exact quote was, "The Vikings have no interest in Aaron Rodgers despite his interest in them." So what this means, guys, is that Aaron Rodgers, I think, is probably using Dianna Russini and Mike Silver, two reporters that are in the quote-unquote Rodgers circle. Russini, her agent is from the same agency as Rodgers' agent. And then also Mike Silver is a Bay Area guy. Rodgers is a Bay Area guy, so that's why they have a connection. All right, so I do think Rodgers and his team are kind of trying to get it out there that he wants to go to the Vikings. And who wouldn't want to go to the Vikings? If I was a free agent quarterback, I would want to go to the Vikings. All right, they've revamped their offensive and defensive lines in free agency. They brought back some key pieces like Harrison Smith and Byron Murphy Jr. They spent a lot of money in free agency through this point, and they have a good offensive line now. They have the coach of the year in Kevin O'Connell. They have arguably the best receiver in the game in Justin Jefferson. They've got a really good number 2 receiver in Jordan Addison, a good tight end in TJ Hawkinson, a defense led by Brian Flores that looks like it's going to be once again really good next year. Like, if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I'm looking to maximize my opportunity to win a Super Bowl, before I retire, Minnesota is the place that I would want to be going. And it certainly seems like he and his team are trying to get the word out there that he wants to go to Minnesota, and he's trying to get them involved to potentially offer him a deal. The reporting goes that he currently has standing offers from both the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New York Giants. Apparently the Giants' offer is more lucrative money-wise, and there's a lot of people that are speculating that Rodgers is using the report about the Vikings to try and get more money out of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But honestly, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, I think Rodgers is just trying to get the word out there to try to get Minnesota to get in on him. All the reporting that I've been hearing about Rodgers and the Vikings from people that I trust, and Albright certainly is pointing to this, is that the Minnesota Vikings are cool with sticking with J.J. McCarthy. They are not in on Aaron Rodgers. No matter how much Rodgers wants to go to Minnesota, I don't think Minnesota and Kevin O'Connell, their head coach, is going to put their hat in the ring. And I do think they're going to move forward with the quarterback they took in the top 10 of last year's NFL draft in J.J. McCarthy. I trust Benjamin Albright's word against pretty much anybody else in the space. I also believe the words of guys like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Jeremy Fowler. They are all reputable sources, and I'm not trying to say Dianna Russini and Mike Silver are not, but I definitely think that at this point, Aaron Rodgers wants to go to the Minnesota Vikings, and he's trying to do everything he can to go there. And for good reason. They were a 14-3 football team last year, and they have only gotten better roster-wise this offseason. They got the coach of the year there. I think Rodgers definitely wants to play in Minnesota. But if Minnesota doesn't throw their hat in the ring, and it's looking like they're not, it's looking like Rodgers is going to have to make a decision between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New York Football Giants. Now, if he's looking for more money, it looks like the Giants are willing to give him that. The Steelers are not willing to give him as much as the Giants are, but it sounds like the money is not an issue. Jerry Dulac reported earlier this week that money was not necessarily a big issue with the Rodgers contract. I really think, guys, that it's just Rodgers trying to find some way somehow to get to Minnesota and get on that roster. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he would hate coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers, all right? Like, obviously, Minnesota's situation is just objectively better, all right? They got the offensive head coach that runs a system that Rodgers would be comfortable with. Justin Jefferson is better than any of the receivers that the Steelers have on their roster. The defense is going to be good there. They've made moves to make their trench play better. But that doesn't mean the Steelers' situation is a bad one for Aaron Rodgers. Like, I think it's a good analogy here is that Aaron Rodgers has like 3 choices of flavors of ice cream right now. He's got like strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla. All right, and he really wants strawberry. He would really prefer to get strawberry, but he would be fine with chocolate, and vanilla maybe not so much. I think right now Minnesota is the strawberry ice cream where he really wants that flavor. But if that's not available, if the ice cream parlor doesn't have that ice cream and they're not offering it, then he's more than fine going with the chocolate, which would be the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then I think the New York Giants kind of have a shaky situation offensively. They do have Andrew Thomas and Malik Neighbors, but their offensive line as a whole is a big question mark. We don't, outside of Neighbors, they don't really have a whole lot of high-end receiving weapons. Brian Dable's job is certainly up in the air, and they're probably going to take a quarterback in the NFL draft to challenge Aaron Rodgers, which probably wouldn't happen as much here in Pittsburgh. Because I think the Steelers are willing to give him the 2-year commitment that he is reportedly looking for. So I think that right now, if the choice is between the Steelers and the Giants, it's going to be the Steelers, all right? And if Minnesota is off the table, as Benjamin Albright is saying right now, that is very good news if you are hoping the Pittsburgh Steelers finally get this done eventually and bring in Aaron Rodgers to be this team's starting quarterback. Now, if the Steelers do miss out on Rodgers, I think they should absolutely bring in Russell Wilson. And I think Russell Wilson should want to come back to the Pittsburgh Steelers, all right? Like, Russ and the Steelers immediately become each other's best options if Rodgers decides to go to the Giants especially, but also with the Vikings. Like we talked about, Pittsburgh's situation is better than New York. So if you're Russell Wilson, you got DK Metcalf and George Pickens, 2 deep threat receivers, an offense that's built perfectly for your skill set. I would want to come back to Pittsburgh if I were Russell Wilson right now. And, if Rodgers ends up going to New York or Minnesota, I would personally, if I'm the Steelers, I'm giving Russell Wilson a call and I'm trying to get a deal done with Russ as soon as I can, because the alternative, going with Mason Rudolph or, going with Joe Flacco or Jameis Winston, I think there's a big gap between Russell Wilson and those other options. And, I think that Russell Wilson can still have success in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense with DK Metcalf, who he clearly has chemistry with, George Pickens, who he had a great connection with last year, He has some chemistry already built up with Calvin Austin III and Pat Freiermuth. The offensive line is hopefully going to be better next year with more people healthy and another year of development for the younger pieces on this O-line. They're going to be drafting a running back early to pair with Jaylen Warren. So the run game should be better, and if the offense as a whole is better, that should make the defense better as well. So I still think this team can have success with Russell Wilson. And, I don't think Mason Rudolph is a serious plan at QB1. I know there's a lot of people that like Mason in this fan base, and rightfully so. I think he's a Steelers legend for life for that 3-game win streak that he had in 2023 to save the season, save Christmas, and get this team to the playoffs. All right, I appreciate Mason for what he's done for this franchise and the player that he is, and I'm glad that he's back. I think he's a very solid NFL backup that if, God forbid, the Steelers starting quarterback goes down with an injury, you can trust Mason Rudolph to go in there and give you a chance to win some football games while the number one option recovers. But, you take a look at some of these numbers here, man. I put them out on my Twitter earlier today. Like, you look at the career numbers with Mason Rudolph. 63.7% completion percentage. That would have ranked 26th in the league last year. 6.7 yards per attempt throughout his career. That would rank 31st in the league last year. 4.1% touchdown percentage would rank 23rd. 2.9% interception percentage would rank 35th. And then his passer rating of 84.7 for his career would rank 30th in the NFL last year. And if you think that those career averages are being bogged down by some bad play in his early Steelers career, last year with the Tennessee Titans, he had the 25th ranked completion percentage, 30th ranked yards per attempt, 27th in touchdown percentage, 40th in interception percentage, so he throws a lot of interceptions, and he was 37th in passer rating, 30th in EPA per play, and then 39th in big-time throw percentage. So I just don't think Mason Rudolph is a serious contender for this job, especially when you've got guys like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson still up for grabs in NFL free agency. And as much as I appreciate the success he had in 2023, we have to put it in the context, guys, that he did it against the 31st and 30th ranked defenses in the league, in the Bengals and the Seahawks, and then he played the backups of the Baltimore Ravens in the season finale and still barely beat them. And then he goes into the playoffs against the Buffalo Bills, the only true playoff caliber opponent that they played with Rudolph at quarterback, and he completed less than 60% of his passes. He had less than 6 yards per attempt, which is really bad, by the way. Like, there's a reason why this team moved off of Mason Rudolph for Russell Wilson last offseason, and I still think Russell Wilson is the better option compared to Mason Rudolph at this point in time. So, I think that right now, when it comes to percentages, all right, in terms of Aaron Rodgers coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think there's an 85% chance around that he's going to end up going to the Steelers. 85%. It might even be higher than that. All right, because I do think that the Vikings are probably out on him, and I don't think they will get in on him. And I think that between the Steelers and Giants, his chances to win in Pittsburgh are a lot higher than they are in New York. So I'll give him an 85% chance to come to Pittsburgh. I'll give him a 10% chance to go to the New York Giants, and I'll give him a 5% chance to go to the Minnesota Vikings. The only way the Vikings will get him is if they put their hat in the ring for him, and I just don't see them doing that if they haven't done that already. In terms of the Steelers, I have an 85% chance that they get Rodgers, but then I have a 12% chance that they get Russell Wilson. I think that there's around an 80% chance or so that they bring back Russ if they can't land Rodgers. So 80% of 85 is 12%. So I will go with that, or 80% of 15% is 12, so 12% for Russ, and then 3% that they don't get either. So I think at this point, guys, it's still a very good bet that the Pittsburgh Steelers will either have Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson as their starting quarterback heading into the 2025 NFL season. And then there's a small chance, around a 3% chance from my perspective here, that you're stuck with Mason Rudolph and you don't get either Rodgers or Russ. In that scenario, I'm targeting Tyler Shuck, quarterback out of Louisville, early on in the NFL draft to pair with Mason Rudolph, and hopefully one of those two can play well enough where you are a playoff team in 2025. So that's where I think the Steelers quarterback situation is. I still think that there's a really good chance Rodgers picks the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think that there's around an 85% chance that we're still talking about Rodgers as this team's starter next season. So before I wrap things up here, we're already approaching around 15 minutes on this video. I want to talk about some of the remaining team needs that the Steelers have after the first week of free agency here. I still think they need a defensive lineman. So Calais Campbell is somebody that could be a starting option, or if you plan on getting a day one starter early on in the NFL draft at defensive tackle, I think Armon Watts is somebody that the Steelers can get as a rotational piece. Watts was a rotational piece in this defense 2 seasons ago, had a really good PFF grade, had really good tape, was a great fit for what the Steelers asked him to do. But Calais Campbell, they brought in Darius Slay, who's heading into the final year of his NFL career. Of course, they've got Cam Hayward, who is heading towards the end of his career. Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson are getting older, so Calais Campbell's another guy that could be entering the final year of his NFL journey. Could he want to come to the Pittsburgh Steelers? He could start right away. He's a really good run defender. You'd probably have to keep Keanu Benton at nose tackle if you bring in Calais Campbell, because he's not a nose tackle, but I'd be open to that. And then slot corner, you still need a slot corner. You can technically put Brandon Echols, who they just signed, in the slot. He can play both outside and inside, so he's got that versatility. But Mike Hilton is still available in free agency, which means he's probably pretty affordable. If I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Hilton was awesome in this defense when he was here in Pittsburgh, man. I would love to bring him back and elevate this defense to a whole nother level by adding that slot cornerback position, which was such an issue for the Steelers last season. They also need a third safety, 2 guys to keep your eye on at that position. Marcus Epps, who was with the Raiders last year as a third safety, played under new secondary coach here in Pittsburgh, Gerald Alexander. So that connection might land him in Pittsburgh. And then Isaiah Simmons, who formerly played with the New York Giants last year. You can put him at hybrid linebacker. You can put him at strong safety. You can put him even as a slot defender. Like Isaiah Simmons could potentially fill that role as well. He's that athletic as a player. So I would look at those 2 guys, and then they still need a swing tackle of some sorts. Trent Brown is still out there. That's the name that I would prefer. You need somebody to be able to come in and somebody that you trust to start for your football team if Broderick Jones is a disaster at left tackle, or if Troy Fautano gets injured. And both of those things are relatively, they're possible. All right, they're legit possibilities. So you need to have a good swing tackle here in Pittsburgh. Trent Brown is still out there. That's the guy that I would go get. I really don't think they're going to make a big splash at wide receiver, guys. If they bring in somebody, it's going to be like someone like Alan Lazard or something like that if the Jets end up releasing him. I really think that they view Calvin Austin III and Roman Wilson as legit wide receiver 3 options for this team. And of course, you've got DK Metcalf and George Pickens as your top 2 wide receiver options. So I don't necessarily see wide receiver as something they're going to go get. I don't see running back as a big need right now, because I think they're going to draft a running back early to pair with Jaylen Warren. And then other than that, defensive line, slot corner, third safety, and swing tackle. I think right now the Steelers feel pretty good about where they sit roster-wise. Right now, of course, the big priority is getting that quarterback under contract. I do think that Aaron Rodgers is still by far the favorite to be the choice, and by far the most likely to be signed as this team's starting quarterback. It's just a matter of when does he decide that the Vikings are no longer going to be an option for him, and he decides to sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see how long that process takes him, but I think that's eventually where we're heading here. I think Rodgers will still sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers. If it's later tonight, Coop and I will be going into the office to break it down with you guys. If it's tomorrow, if it's Monday, whenever, we will go live for whenever that decision is made. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of today's at-home video. I mean, goodness, if you made it to the end of today's video, almost made it 20 minutes. It's already 18 minutes and 30 seconds on this video. If you're still watching, that makes you one of the true real ones. Let me know who the real ones are down there in the comments section by typing real one for me down there in the comments section. I will talk to you guys at some point tomorrow or maybe even later tonight, depending on the Rodgers news. Really do appreciate your guys' support. And until next time, here we go, Steelers.